All right, so today we're really diving into some heavy stuff, some pretty intense primary source material about a pivotal moment in Texas history.
Yeah,
The Comanche attack on Mission San Sabá back in 1758.
right.
It's a story of clashing cultures, miscalculations, and frankly, a whole lot of bloodshed on the 18th century Texas frontier.
It really is. And what's particularly interesting, I think, is how this event, reveals the complex interplay between
Yeah.
Spanish expansion and Apache alliances, and then the rising force of the Comanches.
Right.
It's not just about one attack.
Yeah.
It's really about all these power dynamics that were reshaping the entire region.
I'm already hooked.
Yeah.
And to think neither the Comanches nor the Apaches were even originally from this area.
That's right.
Yeah.
Both were drawn to the Texas plains for the abundance of buffalo.
Right.
But the Apaches, having adopted horses earlier, initially held the upper hand, becoming a real thorn in the side of the Spanish,
Oh, yeah.
who were pushing up from Mexico.
The Spanish were encountering a kind of warfare they weren't prepared for.
Exactly. They had never faced such skilled horsemen and raiders. But the Apaches were just the opening act, so to speak.
Okay.
The Comanches, migrating south from the Great Plains, quickly acquired firearms from French traders in Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
This completely changed the game, giving them a significant advantage over the Apaches, who relied mostly on traditional weapons.
That makes me think about the saying, sometimes the enemy of your enemy is still your enemy.
Right.
So how did the Spanish factor into this rivalry?
Well, the Spanish saw an opportunity.
Right.
They refused to trade guns with the Apaches,
Ah.
hoping to either weaken them or force them to seek Spanish protection against the Comanches.
Right.
It was a gamble based on a pretty serious underestimation of Comanche strength.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. Europeans underestimating the indigenous peoples they were encountering.
Yeah.
Did this miscalculation backfire?
Oh, spectacularly.
Oh, boy.
In 1749, a group of Lipan Apaches approached the Spanish in San Antonio, asking for peace and requesting a mission be built on the San Sabá riverland they had already been driven from by the Comanches.
So their plea for peace was more like a strategic maneuver. It seems like they were hoping to use the Spanish as a buffer against the Comanches.
Precisely. It raises the question.
Yeah.
Were they genuinely seeking peace?
Right?
Or were they playing a more dangerous game, trying to pit the Spanish against the Comanches?
And did the Spanish buy it? I mean, they must have realized the Apaches had an ulterior motive.
Well, driven by a mix of religious zeal and a desire to protect their mining interests in the area.
Uh-huh.
The Spanish established Mission San Sabá and the nearby Presidio San Sabá in 1757.
Okay.
A presidio, by the way, is essentially a fortified military settlement,
Right.
usually built to protect a mission.
So they marched right into what was basically Comanche territory.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that ended well.
As you might expect, very few Apaches actually showed up at the mission once it was built.
Oh, really?
Their true intentions were pretty clear at that point. And then in March 1758, the situation escalated dramatically. A massive force of Comanches and their allies,
Oh, boy.
estimated at around 2,000 warriors,
Oh,
arrived at Mission San Sabá.
2,000 warriors.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I can't even fathom the sheer scale of that force.
It's really hard to wrap your mind around it.
Yeah, how did the Spanish even begin to respond to that?
Well, to put that in perspective,
Yeah.
the mission was defended by just a handful of Spanish soldiers. This
Yeah.
wasn't just a raiding party.
Yeah.
This was a show of force. And what's fascinating is the Comanches weren't just a mass of unorganized warriors. They were armed with a mix of traditional weapons and European firearms and even armor.
Oh, wow.
They'd acquired through trade, demonstrating a level of sophistication and adaptability that
Yeah.
really startled the Spanish.
Okay, so they're seriously outnumbered, facing a technologically advanced force. What did the Spanish do?
Well, Father Toreros, the leader of the mission,
Okay.
clung to his pacifist beliefs,
Wow.
refusing to allow his men to fire on the Comanches.
Oh, wow.
Even as they approached.
He was sticking to his principles, even in the face of imminent danger. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly naive.
All right.
I'm guessing the Comanches didn't share his pacifist ideals.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
This difference in worldviews is a crucial element here.
Right.
The Spanish believed in peaceful conversion,
Right.
while the Comanches were a warrior culture where strength and dominance were paramount.
Yeah.
Their initial attempts at peaceful interaction
Okay.
quickly dissolved. They began looting the mission, taking whatever they could get their hands on.
I can only imagine the tension and fear within the mission walls at this point.
Right.
What did the Spanish do? Did they try to defend themselves?
Colonel Parilla, the commander of the nearby Presidio, was understandably worried.
Yeah.
And sent a small group of soldiers to check on the mission.
Oh, okay.
But they were intercepted by a much larger group of Comanches and, well, slaughtered.
Oh, gosh.
And to add insult to injury, the Comanches then rode back to the mission, waving the scalps of the dead soldiers. Okay, that's horrifying. This is escalating really quickly. What happened next? Did the Comanches attack the mission outright?
What triggered the final attack is unclear.
Okay.
Accounts differ, but what we do know is it was a brutal massacre.
So Father Torero's pacifism didn't exactly save the mission.
It's a tragic irony. He was among the first to be killed.
This all sounds incredibly grim. Was there any resistance from the Spanish at all?
Absolutely. Despite being utterly outnumbered, there were acts of incredible bravery.
Oh?
Accounts mention Juan Leal, a civilian servant fighting back fiercely,
Right.
and Joseph Vasquez, who was thrown into a fire but somehow survived.
That's incredible.
It really is.
It's remarkable to think of these individuals facing such overwhelming odds and still finding the courage to resist. What was the ultimate outcome of the attack?
The Comanches inflicted significant damage looting and burning buildings.
Okay.
But interestingly, they eventually withdrew without attacking the better defended Presidio.
That's curious.
Yeah.
Why not press their advantage and take the Presidio too?
It seems their goal wasn't total annihilation.
Okay.
They'd made their point. They had inflicted a crushing defeat on the Spanish and demonstrated their power.
Yeah.
Attacking the Presidio might have resulted in heavier casualties.
Right.
And they likely calculated that the risk wasn't worth the reward.
So they were thinking strategically,
Yeah.
choosing their battles carefully.
Yeah.
What were the immediate consequences of this attack for the Spanish?
Well, the attack on Mission San Sabá was a symbolic victory for the Comanches.
Right.
The mission was never rebuilt,
Okay.
and it marked a turning point in the struggle for control of the Texas frontier.
So even though the Comanches didn't conquer all of Spanish Texas,
Right.
this one attack had a ripple effect that changed the entire dynamic.
Precisely. It exposed the limitations of Spanish power and emboldened the Comanches,
Yeah.
marking the beginning of their dominance on the Texas plains.
We'll delve deeper into the long-term consequences after a short break.
Okay. We left off with the Comanches making a powerful statement at San Sabá.
It seems like they were playing the long game,
Yeah.
and this was just the opening move.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about resources or territory.
Right.
It was about sending a message, asserting their dominance on the Texas plains.
Uh-huh.
The psychological impact of this attack on the Spanish shouldn't be underestimated.
So it wasn't just a military defeat. It was a blow to their confidence, their whole sense of control.
Exactly. It forced them to rethink their entire strategy for expansion.
Right.
They had been pushing northward, establishing missions and settlements,
Yeah.
assuming they could extend their control over the region.
No.
But San Sabá really exposed the flaws in that assumption.
And what about the Apaches?
Yeah.
They were the ones who instigated this whole situation, hoping to use the Spanish for protection.
Right.
How did this backfire on them?
Well, the Apaches found themselves caught in a really precarious position.
Yeah.
The Spanish were now even more distrustful of their motives,
Right.
and their relationship became strained, marked by suspicion and resentment.
It seems like they miscalculated on multiple fronts.
Mhm.
They didn't get the protection they hoped for from the Spanish,
Yeah.
and they further antagonized the Comanches. Not a good outcome.
It really highlights the danger of trying to manipulate larger powers for your own gain.
Yeah.
Sometimes you end up getting crushed in the process.
So let's shift our focus back to the Comanches. Their victory at San Sabá solidified their position as the dominant force in Texas.
Right.
What did that dominance look like? How did it shape their interactions with others and their own society?
The Comanches were incredibly adept at wielding their newfound power.
Okay.
Their mastery of horsemanship and warfare allowed them to control vast territories,
Right.
and they developed a complex trading network that extended across the Southwest.
Wow.
They traded horses' hides and captives, acquiring goods and weapons that further strengthened their position.
It seems like their success wasn't just about military might, but also about their economic and political savvy.
Absolutely. They understood how to leverage their strengths and exploit opportunities. This Spanish refusal to trade guns with the Apaches, intended to weaken them,
Right.
actually ended up benefiting the Comanches, who readily acquired firearms through other channels like French traders.
It's almost ironic. The very strategy the Spanish employed to maintain control inadvertently fueled the rise of their most formidable adversary.
Right.
What can we learn from this about unintended consequences in history?
Well, it reminds us that history is rarely a neat and linear progression.
Right.
Actions have unforeseen ripple effects, and even the best laid plans can go awry.
Yeah.
In this case, the Spanish decision backfired spectacularly, shifting the balance of power in a way they could never have anticipated.
I'm struck by the fact that we often view history through a Eurocentric lens, focusing on the actions and perspectives of European powers.
Yeah.
But the Comanche story challenges that perspective, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It forces us to recognize the agency and ingenuity of indigenous peoples, their ability to resist colonization, and their own complex motivations and strategies.
Right.
The Comanches weren't simply reacting to Spanish expansion.
Yeah.
They were actively shaping events, forging their own destiny in a rapidly changing world.
And they weren't just a faceless, homogenous group either. They were individuals with families, beliefs, and aspirations navigating a world full of challenges and opportunities.
You're raising a critical point.
Yeah.
Often historical narratives flatten the experiences of indigenous peoples, presenting them as monolithic groups rather than diverse societies with internal conflicts and individual stories.
Yeah.
The reality is far more nuanced and fascinating.
So if we want to truly understand the Comanches, we need to go beyond the simplistic label of fierce warriors.
Yeah.
We need to understand their culture, their values, their internal dynamics.
Exactly. We need to recognize that their rise to power wasn't simply about violence and conquest. It was about adaptation resilience and a deep understanding of their environment. They mastered the art of horsemanship, developed sophisticated trading networks, and built alliances with other tribes, all while maintaining their distinct cultural identity.
It's a far cry from the stereotypical image of savage Indians on horseback, isn't it?
Right.
Their story challenges us to re-examine our own assumptions and biases.
I couldn't agree more. The Comanche story offers a compelling counter-narrative to traditional historical accounts.
Yeah.
It's a story of strength, resilience, and adaptation in the face of immense challenges.
But it's also a story of tragedy and loss. We can't forget that their eventual fate was confinement to reservations, a devastating outcome for a people who had once commanded such power and influence.
That's an important point to remember. The Comanche story, while inspiring, is also a stark reminder of the devastating impact of colonialism on indigenous cultures and the lasting legacy of oppression.
And that brings us to the human stories within this larger historical narrative. We talked earlier about acts of bravery during the attack.
Yeah.
Men like Juan Leal and Joseph Vasquez. Their stories offer a glimpse into the human drama that unfolded amidst the chaos and violence.
Absolutely. These individual stories add depth and texture to the historical narrative, reminding us that history is ultimately about people, their choices, their sacrifices, their triumphs, and their tragedies.
Let's start with Juan Leal, the civilian servant who fought alongside the soldiers. What do we know about him?
Sadly, historical records about individuals like Juan Leal are often sparse. We don't know much about his background or motivations, but his actions speak volumes. Here was a man with no formal military training, standing against a fierce enemy, defending a mission he believed in.
It's a testament to the human spirit, isn't it?
It is.
That even in the face of overwhelming odds, individuals can find the courage to act heroically. It makes you wonder what was going through his mind as he stood there, musket in hand, facing those Comanche warriors.
We can only imagine. But his story and those like it remind us that history is made by ordinary people, not just the generals and politicians. It's made by individuals like Juan Leal, who in a moment of crisis chose to act with extraordinary courage.
And then there's Joseph Vasquez, who survived not only the initial ambush, but also being thrown into a fire. His story is almost unbelievable.
It really is remarkable. He was severely wounded, left for dead. Yet he managed to crawl back to the mission while it was still under attack.
Wow.
And then to be thrown into a burning building and escape with only burns on his hand, it defies belief.
It speaks to an incredible will to survive. What do we know about his life after the attack?
Unfortunately, details are scarce. But his story, even without a neat and tidy ending, serves as a powerful reminder of human resilience, our capacity to endure unimaginable suffering and emerge somehow still standing.
His story, like Juan Leal's, reminds us that even amidst tragedy and loss, there are always individual stories of courage, defiance, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.
Absolutely.
It adds another layer to our understanding of the Comanche attack, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It reminds us that history isn't just about grand narratives and sweeping pronouncements. It's also about the individual lives touched by those events.
Right.
The personal struggles and triumphs that often go unnoticed in the official accounts.
It's a reminder to look beyond the headlines, to search for the human stories that give history its depth and complexity.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of this story, the aftermath.
Right.
The attack on San Sabá wasn't just a singular event.
Yeah.
It had a profound impact on the political, social, and cultural landscape of the Texas frontier for decades to come. We'll explore that in more detail after a short break.
So we've been unpacking this pivotal event, the Comanche attack on Mission San Sabá, and it's clear this is a major turning point in Texas history.
It really was.
It wasn't just about one battle, but about a clash of civilizations and the reshaping of power dynamics on the frontier.
Exactly. The aftermath of the attack is where things get even more intriguing.
Oh, really?
How did the Spanish, who consider themselves a global superpower, respond to this stunning defeat at the hands of the Comanches?
Well, I imagine their pride was pretty wounded. Did they try to retaliate?
They did. The Spanish launched several punitive expeditions against the Comanches, hoping to inflict revenge and reassert their authority. But these campaigns were largely ineffective, often resulting in heavy Spanish casualties.
So the Comanches weren't easily intimidated. It seems like they knew how to use the terrain to their advantage.
They were masters of guerrilla warfare, adept at hit-and-run tactics. They could easily evade large Spanish armies, striking when and where they chose, then disappearing back into the vast Texas landscape.
Wow.
The Spanish, with their traditional European military tactics, were simply ill-equipped to deal with this kind of fluid and adaptable warfare.
It sounds like they were trying to impose a European style of warfare on a landscape and a people that fought very differently.
Yeah.
What did they do when these expeditions failed? Did they give up on their ambitions in Texas?
Not entirely, but they had to shift gears. Okay.
They realized that brute force wasn't working. So they began to explore diplomatic solutions, trying to negotiate treaties with the Comanches. Offering gifts, concessions, even access to trade in exchange for peace.
So a bit of carrot and stick.
Yeah.
But with less emphasis on the stick this time. Did this new approach work?
It was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
A long and often frustrating process.
There
were misunderstandings, broken promises, and, of course, sporadic outbreaks of violence. But it did mark a significant shift in Spanish policy, a recognition that peaceful coexistence, however fragile, was a more viable option than endless war.
It seems they were finally starting to learn that they couldn't simply dominate the Comanches. They had to find a way to coexist, even if it meant compromising. What about the Apaches? We haven't talked about them much since they instigated the whole situation with their request for the mission.
Well, the Apaches found themselves in an even more difficult situation after the attack.
The Spanish, who were already suspicious of them, now viewed them with even greater distrust.
I can't say I blame them. It wasn't exactly a good faith request from the Apaches.
Their relationship with the Spanish deteriorated further, becoming more and more strained. And of course, they were still facing constant threats from the Comanches. They were caught between a rock and a hard place, facing hostility from both sides.
What a mess.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine a worse strategic outcome for the Apaches.
Yeah.
So what did they do? How did they survive this pressure cooker?
The Apaches demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Some groups sought alliances with other tribes, hoping to find strength in numbers. Others tried to negotiate treaties with the Spanish, offering their services as scouts or warriors in exchange for some semblance of protection.
It sounds like a desperate scramble for survival. Trying to play one side against the other. Did any of these strategies work?
It was a challenging time for the Apaches, filled with uncertainty and hardship. They were constantly on the move, trying to avoid conflict and find safe haven. Their once dominant position on the Texas plains had been shattered. And they were forced to adjust to this new and dangerous reality.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in the face of shifting power dynamics.
Absolutely.
1 minute you're at the top of the food chain. The next you're fighting for survival. But they did survive.
They did.
They adapted. They persevered. That's a powerful testament to their tenacity, their refusal to give up.
It certainly is. Their story speaks to a universal human experience. The capacity to endure hardship, to adapt to changing circumstances, to find ways to persevere even when the odds are stacked against you.
The Comanche attack on Mission San Sabá was a pivotal event that reshaped the entire landscape of Texas.
Yeah.
It's a story of clashing cultures, military strategies, political maneuvering,
Right.
and ultimately the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity.
It also challenges us to re-examine history through a more nuanced lens, to recognize the agency and complexity of indigenous cultures, and to understand the ripple effects of seemingly isolated events.
It's been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
And I'm sure our listener is now filled with questions and new perspectives. What are some of the broader lessons we can glean from this story, lessons that resonate even today?
Well, for me, the most striking takeaway is the importance of cultural understanding.
Okay.
The clash between the Spanish and the Comanches was, in many ways, a clash of worldviews.
Yeah.
The Spanish, with their belief in their own cultural and religious superiority,
Right.
failed to truly grasp the complexities of Comanche society and their deep-rooted warrior traditions. This lack of understanding led to miscalculations and ultimately fueled the conflict.
That's a powerful reminder that cultural sensitivity isn't just a feel-good concept. It has real-world implications.
It does.
Ignoring or dismissing other cultures can have disastrous consequences.
Precisely. Whether we're dealing with international relations, business negotiations, or even personal relationships, the ability to understand and respect different cultural perspectives is essential.
Right.
It's the foundation of empathy, communication, and peaceful coexistence.
Another key takeaway for me is the power of adaptation.
Yeah.
The Comanches were relative newcomers to the Texas plains.
Right.
Yet they quickly mastered the environment, embraced new technologies, and developed innovative strategies for survival and dominance.
And they did all of this while retaining their core values and their cultural identity.
Right.
They adapted to the changing world around them without sacrificing who they were.
That's a valuable lesson for us all, isn't it?
It is.
In a world that's constantly evolving, the ability to adapt is crucial for success.
Right.
But adaptation doesn't mean losing yourself.
Right.
It's about finding ways to thrive in new environments while staying true to your values and your vision.
And finally, I think the story highlights the importance of resilience. The Apaches, caught between two powerful forces, faced incredible hardship and displacement.
Yet they persevered, adapting their strategies, forging new alliances, and finding ways to survive against all odds.
Their story is a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Our capacity to overcome adversity and emerge, perhaps scarred, but unbroken.
The Comanche attack on Mission San Sabá is a story of conflict, tragedy, and loss.
Yeah.
But it's also a story of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit to adapt and persevere, even in the face of overwhelming challenges.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
We've explored the events at San Sabá, the clash of cultures, the stories of heroism, and the lasting impact of this event on the Texas frontier.
Yeah.
But what about the legacy of the Comanches themselves? They were eventually confined to reservations, their way of life disrupted, their power diminished. But their story continues to fascinate and inspire, doesn't it?
It does.
It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own history.
To recognize the resilience of indigenous cultures and to appreciate the complexities of a past that continues to shape our present.
It's a reminder that history is never truly over. It lives on in our stories, our values, and our understanding of the world.
Yeah.
And the voices of those who resisted oppression, who fought for their freedom and their way of life, deserve to be heard not just in the past, but in the present and the future as well.
I encourage our listener to delve deeper into the history of the Comanches and other indigenous peoples of North America.
Yeah.
Explore their cultures, their struggles, their triumphs, and their enduring legacy. It's a journey of discovery that will enrich your understanding of the past. And perhaps even shed new light on the present.
And who knows, maybe you'll even uncover some surprising connections to your own personal story, your own family history, or your own community.
Yeah.
The past is never truly past. It's woven into the fabric of our lives, waiting to be rediscovered and reinterpreted.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you to our expert for sharing their incredible knowledge and insights with us.
My pleasure.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.